And so when I started to understand this brain behavior connection and how if we have a child whose brain works differently, we have to consider that in every single thing we do in parenting them, that's when things started to make sense. And soon after that, I thought, well, where are the providers teaching other parents this? And I couldn't find anyone. Like at that time, I was like, where are my people? I need to find somebody who could walk alongside me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Polaris Connection, your podcast that connects parents of autistic children with industry experts and proven results. I am your host, Brad Broyles, and I'm here with my brainiest co-host, Nathan Palmer.
Brad, thank you for that. And, I would like to take that as a compliment for me, but I have a feeling you used the word brainy for a completely different version that actually describes our guest more than it does me.
Yes, and we are so excited to have our brain first expert, Eileen Devine. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here talking with your audience.
Well, and for everybody, Nathan, Eileen has 20 years of experience as a licensed clinical social worker, and you're living in Portland, Oregon. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, and I've been a social worker for a long time, longer than I've been a parent, which my guess is we'll get into a little bit of that. And the work that I do now, I've been doing for about the last, I'd say 15 years of those 20 years. So.
Wow.
As a parent. So you've blended continuing to do this as a parent and in addition to all the other things that you're developing.
Yes. So I have 2 teenagers, and I always thought that teenagers would be a little less work. In the younger years. I was wrong about that. I have a junior and a senior in high school, and my daughter Maya is my inspiration for getting into this work 15 or so years ago. My son Connell is my 18-year-old, my senior. And so, yeah, they keep me busy. And I have a wonderful partner, my husband Dave, too, that really makes the magic happen in terms of me being able to fully dive into this work in the way that I love to do.
Oh, wonderful. So it sounds like it's a passion project from beginning. What made you want to take the next step and kind of put together this brain-first parenting approach?
Yeah, so my daughter Maya came to us through adoption. She came to us as a newborn, and we understood pretty quickly that her development wasn't typical. And I feel like we were at a slight advantage because we had this almost side-by-side comparison with my son, who is only 15 months older than her. My son Connell, he is our biological child, and he is what society would consider neurotypical. His brain works exactly as society expects it to work for an 18-year-old. And so the world is set up for him in more ways than one, but definitely navigating a world as a neurotypical individual, it's pretty effortless for him overall, right? And so we saw his development going as we expected, as the books we were reading told us it would. And then Maya came into our life, and it was a very different story. And my husband and I were not deterred by that or overwhelmed by that. We thought, we've got this. That's fine. What does she need? We'll do it. We've got a loving, supporting home. That's what we were reading. That's what it took. And we thought, well, we've got this. No problem. And when she was probably 3 or 4 years old, that's when things started to get really tricky. And when I mean tricky, what I'm talking about is behaviorally. She was outside the norm of the difficult 3 and 4 year olds. And friends of ours would say, well, that's a tough age. And I was like, nope, this is really, really different. And so that led me on this journey of figuring out, why isn't this working? Why what we're doing for my son, his development, he's thriving. He's quote unquote well-behaved. He's there's nothing of concern there. And everything that we were doing for her, exact same thing, was actually making things worse. That was incredibly frustrating for us as parents.
I love that you give that dynamic. So my son's on the spectrum, but he was our first.
Okay.
And we didn't have anything to compare it against. And so we were a little later in recognizing some of these cues because we didn't know what we didn't know.
That's right.
And I love the contrast, right, where you're sharing that, hey, things worked for our son and he was thriving. And we sometimes get the sense in neurodivergent parenting that we're just bad parents, that we're not figuring it out, that we're doing something wrong. And I like to highlight that that's not necessarily true. There's maybe just different things to be aware of for our neurodivergent kids.
That's right. I mean, what conclusion can you come to if you don't have any other information, right? So if nobody has told you, oh no, you need a completely different way of parenting this child who has a brain that works differently, how do you know that? And in my experience working with thousands of parents at this point, it is very, very rare for somebody in the helping profession to tell a parent, like, okay, so your child now has this diagnosis that points to their brain works differently, and this is what you have to do differently for this child. Those really, really good parenting techniques that we were using for our son, that my guess is you and your partner came into parenting with, they're not bad. They just don't work for a child whose brain works really, really differently. And that's where parents get tripped up.
Well, Eileen, let me ask you that. When in your journey, when did you have to make that shift? Because you're like, okay, I have an adopted child.
Yeah.
They think differently.
Yeah.
When do you know when to, like, okay, I need to make this shift, or hey, I need to keep working on what I was doing before?
Yeah. So I would say it was around 4 years old. Again, we knew her development was delayed or behind, but the behavioral symptoms, that's how I see behavior, symptoms, there's our kids being symptomatic, that was not there until 3 or 4. And that was when my husband and I laugh about it now, we were invited to find a new preschool for her. And that was a real wake-up call, like, oh wow, okay, these experts in childhood education cannot handle her. And I knew that this wasn't about her as a 3 or 4-year-old just wanting to make our life miserable. I knew that it wasn't about that. That didn't make sense to me, but I didn't know what else it was. And so when I started to understand this brain behavior connection and how if we have a child whose brain works differently, we have to consider that in every single thing we do in parenting them, that's when things started to make sense. And soon after that, I thought, well, where are the providers teaching other parents this? And I couldn't find anyone. Like at that time, I was like, where are my people? I need to find somebody who can walk alongside me as I get up this steep learning curve of shifting my understanding of her and parenting her differently. Couldn't find them. And so I thought, well, that's when I changed when I changed the focus of my clinical work and decided, all right, this is what I'm going to start doing for other parents who are in similar situations.
I love that. You know, we, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I just like the whole thing. Where's my people?
Yeah.
And that's why, and that's kind of like why we're doing this, so we can be the people.
Yeah.
Well, and I almost see industry-wide, there's starting to be a bit more of a shift where instead of behavior being the thing we focus on that needs to be modified, behavior becomes a form of communication. And so it's up to us to then decode what's being communicated and why. I've often described autism less as it's not a handicap, it's not a disability, it's a neurological condition.
That's right.
It is the brain literally functions and processes differently. And I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit, because I know that's kind of a focus of what you talk about. And we say it loosely, hey, our brains work differently, but can you just describe a little bit about what that means in practice, that we have different processes?
Yeah, so I think of it as similarly to what you described, that a child who has a diagnosis that points to their brain, what that tells us is they have a brain that works differently than society expects. It's not wrong, it's not bad, it's just different. And they also have a more fragile nervous system. And if the brain and the nervous system are a physical part of our body, which of course they are, then this individual deserves the attention in terms of people figuring out, well, what does that mean for their physical differences? And let's accommodate them for, just like we do any other physical difference or disability. So thinking about every behavior connected to our brain, every behavior that we carry out requires a cognitive skill of some kind, every single day, all day. And what are some of those cognitive skills? Things like processing pace, attention and working memory, being able to remember, connect the dots. A plus B equals this terrible C, so I'm not going to do it. Inhibit the impulse to do it. But there's also this other set of skills, cognitive skills, which I talk about as relational cognitive skills, and these often get missed. And they're things like being able to go with the flow, have flexible thinking, being able to take somebody else's perspective and consider it in what you do next, being able to understand that your actions impact those outside of you, being able to emotionally regulate and stay, rise and fall with life frustrations that come your way, not having big, massive meltdowns over seemingly small things. Interpersonal skills, like how do you know when enough is too enough, like enough is enough? How do you interact with a group of your peers appropriately for that chronological age? all of those pieces that are required for us to be in relationship with another are also cognitive skills. And those especially are often seen as part of our child's character. Like, oh, they're selfish. They don't care about anyone. Like, they're too much, right? They're annoying. Why don't they just knock it off? In fact, that is part of their brain-based differences and requires empathy, understanding, and accommodations as well. So I wanted to highlight those especially because that's where I find parents have the most concern, the most fear, and the most reactivity to it. They're really, really hard ones.
So what do you call that one more time? So we have cognitive skills, and then did you say relationship cognitive skills?
Yeah.
Or is that correct?
Yeah, I call them relational cognitive skills.
Relational, thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
I like that.
Yep.
Because that is the other part of the component. I love how you brought that in and clearly defined it.
Well, and it's almost key because if I may, Eileen, it almost sounds like as parents sometimes we're trying to solve the wrong problem.
Yes.
We look at this behavior or this meltdown as the problem, and we're trying to say, I don't want any more meltdowns, and so we use our limited tools that maybe we use for like a compliance-based model with our typical kids, like a consequence-based or a reward-based.
That's right.
And really that it's not even that it's a problem, it's that this is an expression of another issue that might be an underdeveloped relational skill or something that a typical kid might do in practice, but we have to make an intentional effort as a parent to develop in our neurodivergent children.
Yes, that's when I mention that I see behaviors as symptoms, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Those really challenging behavioral symptoms. I think like a parent will tell me a story of something hard that happened to them, and I say, oh, it sounds like they were so symptomatic in that moment. And even that shift helps that parent remember, like, that's right. They're symptomatic. And what do we want to do as parents? We want to relieve them of their symptoms. Mm-hmm. That's what we want to do. Mm-hmm. So that alone helps us, it softens us a bit. And then what is that a symptom of? It's a symptom of your child being in an environment that is not set up for them, navigating a world that comes nowhere close to being set up for them, and then bumping up against tasks or expectations or demands that they don't have the skills to meet. Right? And so if we continue to focus on the symptoms, we miss the lagging skill piece. And what that also means is that we don't see the opportunity, which is, oh, this is the root cause of that challenging behavior that I so desperately want to have stop. And if I focus there, I can build the skill that's making this difficult for them in the first place. Now, if we think about kids who are, say, 3 or 4 years old, we know that they don't have like these social skills. They are very inflexible. They do not have emotional regulation skills. And we expect that. That's why we think of those ages as pretty tricky, right? As parents, we're glad to see kids move out of that stage. But what if you have an 11, 12, 13-year-old who is not a bad kid? They're not trying to be dramatic or manipulative or make things difficult. They just are still working on those very same skills, and we've forgotten that by that point, right? So if we can remember, like, okay, this is skill-based, how do I identify the lagging skill and help build that skill? That's when things start to get better. That's when our children become less symptomatic, which is what all of us want.
Cool. I love that focus on skill development. So this might be an overly broad question, but as I'm trying to picture myself as a parent listening, okay, and I can understand theoretically what you're saying, that okay, these behaviors are symptoms. There's an underlying skill gap, or maybe there's an environmental stressor that maybe they're just overwhelmed or their nervous system is now overloaded. But Eileen, how do I decode or even begin that process of finding that missing skill and even know where to start? You have this approach you call brain first parenting. So for parents, how do I make that shift, and what are some of those key skills that are more prevalent in this group?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is where it can feel like a steep learning curve. I would encourage parents to just think about how hard they're working already, going after the behavior, right? And we've all been there. There's no blame in that. That's our natural inclination to do that. And what I'm going to suggest is not about working harder. It's just about taking all that energy that you're already expending and focusing it somewhere different. So there's cognitive skills that a lot of people, I think, are more familiar with, like executive functioning or sensory processing. And so that's a good place to start. And what are the patterns that you see in terms of the environment what is being expected of that child in that environment from these different cognitive skills categories or lens, and how do you then begin to more fully accommodate. Now, there's ones that that aren't as obvious, like, for example, processing pace. Maybe that's something that parents haven't thought about before, and it means we are talking too much at our kids. We're expecting them to respond instantaneously when they are 10-second kids in a 1-second world, right? And that's just not the pace that they listen and respond. And so then the accommodation would be talk less, give them more time, right? I know that I'm making it sound so simple, and there are accommodations that are smaller shifts like this. There are others that take a little more detective work. And so starting to dive deep into what are the cognitive skills and the things that the brain does for us, and could this be something that my child struggles with? Giving equal weight to that possibility as we usually give to this behavior is being done on purpose to me. They could do better. They're choosing not to, right? Well, what if? What if this is about them just needing more scaffolded support, more accommodations? What if I have to do this for them because it truly is that hard for them? Leading us down another path that opens up a whole set of possibilities, when this other path that's more behaviorally based and a behavior lens, it really becomes a dead end, right? There's no more consequences to give. There's no more threats that I can make because I've done everything and that still hasn't worked, right? So giving equal weight to this other possibility.
Well, and I think that's a really good tip that you've given us real fast, the cognitive pace. Think about how many parents talk too much to their kids. I know I do.
Me too.
or too fast.
Me too. Yeah.
You know, we like to have them sit down. I'm going to explain everything to you. Then you're going to go off and be perfect.
Yes.
So I think that cognitive pace, just, talking with children, that's a really, really awesome tip.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to circle back, and maybe to your point, Eileen, maybe I'm just slow processing, but I'm hearing what you were saying before, that there's a symptom, and there almost probably is going to be a healthy degree of just self-discovery and intuition in this process, because each one of these neurodivergent children are so different. And I was maybe going to go down the road of what are some common skill gaps you see, but that might inappropriately lead the parents to just say, okay, I'm going to try X, Y, Z, and if I run out of those tools, what else do I have? And this is really about relating and discovering.
That's right.
I had there's a theory out there called neurosequencing, and it's about nervous system regulation, which I want to dive into a little bit later on the podcast. But there was a tip that came out of that I've just really latched onto. It's the 3 R's. And it's a step-by-step way to reclaim control over your own nervous system. And it's called regulate, relate, and then reason.
Yes.
And I think as parents, we dysregulate as often as our kids do. And acting out of that sense of dysregulation sometimes makes us make rash decisions or to not think constructively. And I'm going to go back to your word symptom. That's such a key help, because if I see behavior as symptom, then I'm less likely to be reactive, because I'm now on the hunt. Okay, if that's a symptom, what is the cause?
Yes.
And I'm starting to ask myself more discovery-based questions.
Yes. Well, it depersonalizes it, right? All of a sudden, it's not being done to us on purpose with malice intent. It's a symptom of something else, and it's our job as the parent to figure that out. And once you start to have these small wins, you go down this other path we're talking about, this brain first parenting path, you start to see that momentum build, then it's easier to stay there. But the other piece that you're touching on is we are all symptomatic behaviorally. It's not just our kids. And when our nervous system is dysregulated, our thinking brain goes offline, we do not have access to our own cognitive skills, like inhibiting the impulse. Instead, we say something that we regret later. That's just one example. And
that never happens to me. My wife never tells me.
You're the perfect parent I've never met.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, we all do, right? Because we're human. The goal isn't to be perfect. It's just, as you said, to recognize, ooh, what gets me dysregulated? And am I more fragile as a parent? Every parent that I work with is more fragile than the typical parent because of what they have endured as a parent. right? So the intensity of those behaviors, the intensity of their child needs, the isolation that has brought, that results in this more fragile nervous system. So having a lot of self-compassion and understanding like, yeah, this is as hard as you think it is in these moments. And here's why you are acting, behaving the way that you are. And you can shift that and change that pattern as well. Now, the other piece that you talked about, the 3 R's, understanding that through the lens of our kids, and what do we typically do when things are escalated and our child has done something that is not okay, it is not appropriate, it is not right, and we feel like, no, we need to discuss this now. We just charge into it, right? Sit down, we're going to talk about this, what were you thinking? If they are not regulated, they cannot relate to us. We're dysregulated, we're not connected to them. They cannot reason. And so we're wasting our energy trying to get them to be logical, connect the dots, be reasonable, right? So I talk about this a lot because I see so many parents on this quick path to burnout, trying to parent, again, from this traditional lens of how to address these behaviors. And it just doesn't work for those reasons.
And I'd argue when we as parents go at them that way, like we're putting our foot down, we are also dysregulated.
Oh, totally.
Because that's not constructive parenting. And that's the... that was the aha for me. And the nervous system, I think, doesn't get as much attention as it should. We talk about the brain, we talk about feelings, but the nervous system is really the bridge. It's taking information from our brain and delivering it to our body, but it's also taking information from our body and delivering it to our brain. When you look at the idea of feelings, we call them feelings because they are body sensations. They are what we feel.
That's right.
And when we get that heightened response, it's good for us to even pause and go, hang on, my nervous system is kicked in. I'm in a fight or flight response.
That's right.
And that means that I'm not reasoning properly myself. I'm in my limbic brain, not in my prefrontal cortex thinking, reasoning brain. And so, those 3 steps, again, are key because it's regulate. It's regulate yourself, and you can't regulate your child if you're not regulated.
Right.
Relating, getting some sense of understanding, and then once you have those baselines, now you're in a place that you can reason and parent proactively.
That's right. I want to make sure that the folks listening understand as well that regulation does not always mean calm. And so I've had parents who, from the neck up, they're practicing calm. What I mean by that is they're like, I didn't yell, I kept a straight face, and it's still, quote unquote, not working. It's like, well, what was happening from the neck down? It's like, oh yeah, I was really stirred up, really worked up. It's like, well, that's not regulated. It's not what just happens from the neck up. It's what happens throughout the whole body, just like you mentioned. Now, the good news, I think, for us as just humans is we don't have to be okay and think everything's fine and be okay with what's happening in front of us with this behavior to still be regulated. To be regulated is exactly what you described. It's noticing that our body is starting to get dysregulated and taking the steps to soothe ourselves so that we don't respond in a way that we regret later, right? So we can be angry and frustrated and irritable, but we are managing that, staying in balance as best we can as we meet our child in their distress and what's happening there with them. So real big distinction, I think, that is helpful to parents.
No, thank you for that. I wished I would have had that early on, being more proactive as a parent. And it's great in theory to say it's hard to practice that day-to-day, moment-to-moment. What's my system telling me? How are my emotions acting, and how are they influencing thoughts? That's just a good self-practice. And I think the more we get that concept, the more effective we are at, I think, being more forgiving, more empathetic with our children as they dysregulate.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I like that idea of exploring that with your child too. Like that we're giving parents grace. It's okay, like you mentioned that a little bit earlier. Like, it's okay, parents, you can do this, and don't be so hard on yourself.
That's right.
So,
yep.
I wanted to kind of circle back, kind of go back to your system of brain first parenting. Mm-hmm. And why is that so much, or what is it? What is that, and how does it differentiate of other supports that are out there?
Yeah. So we've been talking about it really this whole time. It is an approach to parenting that considers your child's unique brain and their fragile nervous system. And as we've already talked about, your child can have the same diagnosis of a child of their same age, and there will be a lot of overlap in the way their brain works, but there are distinct differences that make them unique that parents need to know about. And so this helps parents really dive in deep to how does my child's brain work differently in comparison to what I thought or society expected. And those are those cognitive skills. And then the other piece is the fragility of their nervous system. If they are easily overwhelmed, easily swept away by emotion, easily overwhelmed by their environment, those are all signs that point back to that fragile nervous system. And how do I accommodate both the brain, the lagging skills, and the fragility of the nervous system? Now, that's all child-focused, and that's why parents come to me. I work with parents who have kids with very, very challenging behaviors. They literally have tried everything before they reach me. And so that's why they come. They want those behaviors to calm down, understandably. What we inevitably get to in our work together every single time, it cannot be avoided, is what I call this other side of this coin. And it's the parent experience. And we've talked a little bit about that already as well. When we are the ones who are with our kids and providing them with the most secure, consistent attachment, school is important, right? But we are the primary caregiver and the primary attachment figure. There are things that will be expected of us in terms of our ability to co-regulate, stabilize the nervous system, provide accommodations. That is really hard work. And it's hard on our nervous systems to do that work. Not impossible. You can still do this and thrive and find joy in your parenting, but it is a different kind of experience that requires a different intensity and type of support. And so we always get there because they're on this path of learning about their child's unique neurobiology, and then they get stuck. And the stuckness comes from maybe their own levels of burnout, their own patterns of reactivity because of the trauma or the hard things they have been through, and also deeply held beliefs and values about how they thought things should go, how their child should behave at this age. It's like, I hear what you're saying, they need these accommodations, but man, they're 15. Are you kidding me? Are you serious? They can't do this? Like, and the grief and the loss and the worry that comes from that.
It's heavy.
It's heavy. And they will stay stuck if we don't look at that and continue to work that through that, right? So two sides of the coin that deserve absolutely equal weight, but we begin with one typically, the most pressing for the parent, and then we eventually get to the other. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. You know, I appreciate the idea of the other side of the coin. And yeah, we have danced around it a little bit, but the tendency of a parent, and I'm just as guilty as anybody, is when we find out there, and we view it as a problem, let's just be honest, when we first find out about our neurodiverse children, it's like a problem we need to solve. Yeah. And I think that framework starts the initial negativity, which if I could have gone back to early me, when I first learned about my child's diagnosis, I wished I could have said, hey, this is not a problem. This is still your child. Yes. Love them just as much. This is an opportunity to learn a different way of parenting and supporting, but it's not a problem. That would have shifted my mindset, because in the problem set, I go, then what's the solution and who can help me find it? And I almost try to make it somebody else's problem. Like, what is the support that my kid needs? Yeah. And what you're saying is refreshing. It's, what are the skills that I need as a parent to develop to better be there for my kid? And instead of looking for all the resources for my child, I also need to look at resources for myself so that I'm in a healthy space, so that I have the tools I need to be there for them.
That's right. Yep, exactly. I have this, it's a blog post and also a podcast episode called Your Child is Not the Problem. It was created for parents like you.
All right. Well, then that was a good teaser. Yeah, and I've looked at some of your episodes. They're on point. I mean, I have a couple topics I'd love to, if we have time, to jump in on. But that's one that like in Arizona, and I don't know what's happening in Oregon, but like in Arizona, we have this community dialogue going on where some of the services that we've come to rely on are maybe going to be tailored or limited for some of our autistic kids. And there's this huge negative response of, but I need these things, I need these services. And maybe we need to just look at it as, whether I get services or not, those are a bonus, but it gives me a chance as a parent to upgrade and just to take ownership of, I can do this, I can be there for my child. And we can we can intuitively find these underlying issues to the symptoms that we're seeing, and trust our gut, and empower ourselves to address it.
Yeah, I do think it takes a little bit of rebuilding some parents' confidence that they do have the internal and external resources to not just survive this parenting experience, but to actually thrive. I talk about Maya is 17 now, and I can say with complete confidence and honesty that I truly delight in parenting her. And I can also say anyone who knows our family would never say, oh, she's easy. Okay? I mean, both can be true. Both can be true. And for parents who can't imagine that, I understand why that's the case. And it's not your fault that you can't imagine that, but I just want you to know that possibility is there for you.
Cool. Well, and I like how you were talking about working with parents' belief systems. It just reminded me, we had a guest a while ago that she really wanted to have a traditional Christmas with her neurodivergent child, and she realized after a certain age that there was not going to be a traditional Christmas as the way she was brought up to be.
That's right.
And it created a lot of stress on her, which created a lot of stress in the family until there was some adaptation to that belief and going forward. So it just became, but the good thing that we talked about is like, this is going back to our Christmas episode, that every Christmas now is like a new gift, as if that season is a new gift, and it's going to come out a little bit different. And it was just kind of fun how it was, we were able to change that from something that was like not traditional to something that's a new beginning every year. So it's almost like that with parenting. It's almost like a new beginning every day, or almost every moment, as we're working with these wonderful children.
Yeah, well, and to be able to hold that perspective, I mean, when we talk about lagging skills, and I talk a lot about our kids having on and off days or weeks or seasons, where it's not always constant, it's not this linear path. And so with a lot of the parents that I work with, their practice is to wake up in the morning and say, what child do I have today? Because there are going to be some things that happened yesterday that for whatever reason, we could talk about what that is. I don't know if that's the most important thing. It's just knowing that this is going to happen with your child, that today might be an off day, and how do I see it as an off day? And how do I accommodate them even more than I would on an on day, right? And how much relief there can be in that surrendering, but it is a surrendering process to really lean into that and fully believe it, and then to act in that way. So what you described is a perfect example of that.
Eileen, I'm going to pivot just a little bit and talk about a specific issue. And I saw this in it was either a post or one of your podcasts. Okay. And it struck home, and it's something that I know I've heard other parents talk about, and I just would love your insight on it. If nothing else, then to let other parents know this is not uncommon, and it's something that it's more prevalent than it can be lonely in this world. And so just talking about these things sometimes I think helps us feel better that I'm not the only one. You called it a maturity gap or dysmaturity. And how that expresses in neurodivergent kids. I wonder if you could speak about that a little bit and kind of what it is, because I really identified with that one. Yeah,
it is. I'm so glad that you brought it up, because it is foundational to our understanding of our kids who have brains that work differently. I've never ever worked with a parent where this wasn't a part of their child's neurobiological profile. And so what we're talking about is the expectations that we in society have of our kids at certain chronological ages, and where our kids are on their own unique development and trajectory, and the gap between those two, and becoming very, very clear on where that gap is. Now, that in and of itself takes some reflection and some work, and just consistently keeping it top of mind, like a really helpful prompting question, I think, for parents when they're met with a behavior that is confusing, frustrating, embarrassing, irritating, to ask themselves, what age does this remind me of? And if you have a 12-year-old who's quote unquote behaving in the way a kindergartner would, like, how would I support a child of that age in this situation, right? Understanding that the gap could be that great. Now, the other piece of this, the other layer to it, is that the development is uneven. So all of our kids have strengths, and there are times when they appear to be like their neurotypical peers. They appear to be acting in ways that align with their chronological age. And if we're not remembering, okay, it's uneven, it can feel like whiplash. Like, what? They can do that, but they can't do this simple thing? Yeah, that's right. Because sometimes they will have strengths in one skill set or area and really struggle mightily, maybe be more along the lines of what society expects of a kid half their age in another area. And so to, again, familiarize ourselves with where do they shine and where are their strengths, but not to forget that there's going to be these gaps in other places. So that, having a 17-year-old, I describe her to people who are getting to know her and understand her. I said, she's really, in many ways, like a mature 8-year-old. And I'm very careful to say, this is in comparison to where society expects 8-year-olds and 17-year-olds to be. There's nothing wrong with her, but we have to remember that we are dealing with societal expectations here. And that's where she would line up in comparison to those. And so how does an 8-year-old navigate a high school environment? What is appropriate for an 8-year-old in terms of what videos she can see in school, what topics are being covered at a high school level? Like, there's some that just are not appropriate for her, right? Socially and emotionally, what does that mean for her friendships and how she's navigating those really tricky high school dynamics? No wonder things are hard, right? But instead,
yeah, and
go ahead.
Well, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. I'm having an aha moment as a parent, and sorry. I like to overshare, Eileen. I apologize, but
I'm here for it.
So
he is an attorney. So just so you know,
I am a recovering attorney. So. This is true. No, but I just want to restate something you said, and it passed by very quickly. But for me, it was very real. You have to approach the age that their maturity levels at in that skill, and that could be different for different skills.
Yes,
I've got a 15-year-old, and I find myself all the time saying, "You're 15. You should, you need to be 15." And in some areas, he is. But there are some skills that you're right. Maybe it expresses like a 6 or a 7-year-old, and there's others that maybe it's like a 12 or 13. And regulating our approach to the age of that skill and meeting them at that age, that's a shift in how I'm thinking now. And it reminds me of, I'm going to throw a reference here. There's a researcher, his name's Mastin Kipp, that talks about nervous system and nervous system response. And he does it in relation to that movie Inside Out 2. If you haven't seen it by Disney, it's a great visual. He's like, sometimes our kids, there's a part of our brain that takes both visual stimulus and body sensation stimulus, and it combines them and it analyzes, is there a problem or a disconnect? And if it can make sense of it, you have this learned response. And if it doesn't, it throws it to like the back of the brain, that area, like when Joy has a memory that she's not quite happy with, she like ejects it way back into no man's land, right? And that's what we call dissociation. And so it stymies maturity because it takes this skill and it makes it stuck at the level that we experienced it. And until we recall that memory or that sensation or that nervous system response and pair it with our prefrontal cortex and give it new meaning, it stays stuck at that age. And so it's he does a great job about giving a step-by-step way to give the nervous system new responses, but you have to make it intentional. And that starts with, if that experience and that response is a 5-year-old, parent it like a 5-year-old and give it skills as a 5-year-old to turn it into 6 or 7. And the brain's amazing. It can form new pathways, but only if we're giving it a safe path for it to go.
Well,
I
love it, and I'll look up that person's work because they're new to me. But what you just said, there has to be a safe pathway. And so when our child is acting where they are in alignment with how their brain works, so the 13-year-old acting like a 5-year-old. If we come down on them, which again, there's no shame and blame in this reflection. If we come down on them, you should be acting older. What are you doing? You know better. They are instantly going to go into this protective nervous system mode and be in fight or flight or collapse, shut down, right? There is no opportunity to grow skills. They stay stuck. You're exactly right. But if we are able to say like, oh, what age does this remind me of? Okay, what would I do to support a child at that developmental age where this behavior makes way more sense? and we do that, that is when they stay in this regulated, open brain online and able to grow in their cognitive skills, right? And you mentioned the pattern that you fall into. Again, with a 17-year-old, it's an easy one to fall into when you have this big teenage body in front of you and they're acting in this way, right? So recognizing that this takes practice, but you're spotting the patterns. And so how do you interrupt your own pattern to be able to interrupt this other pattern, right? That's where the magic happens.
Yeah. Cool. And it's almost like I almost want to relate it to the problem really is not the child, because they're not a problem. They're operating at the level they're able to operate, and they typically do that with good intention. The problem is that they're not meeting our expectation.
That's right.
And so really, if we want to classify it, the only reason it would quote unquote be a problem is because it is an unmet expectation.
That's right.
And if we remove that label, then instead we can shift and say, okay, this behavior is not indicative of the age I would think it is. What age is it? Mm-hmm. And I can now proactively as a parent meet them where they're at. Right. And that gives the opportunity for growth. Instead of they didn't meet my expectation, forget that. What skill level are they? And let's work on that baseline forward.
That's absolutely right. And again, just wanting to highlight for the parents listening, that is the process. So much good growth can happen from there. But the tricky piece often is when there is this expectation that you're holding on to for dear life, like, why don't I want to let it go, right? So, for example, with older kids, teaching responsibility, they need to know this. They're going to be out in the real world. How are they ever going to be even semi-independent if they don't learn this? It's like, okay, let's not let fear drive our behavior. Nothing ends well when we do that. Let's recognize, let's teach them responsibility. But how do you teach a child half their chronological age responsibility? Let's begin there. And then acknowledging all the feelings that come up when I suggest that, right? With the parents that I'm working with, that's the parent experience, right? Like, oh my gosh, like fear, loss, grief, all of that. So that's the two sides of the coin at play again.
That's the other side of the coin.
Yep.
You know, it's funny. I was going to ask you another question, but I think I've already answered it internally, but I'm going to bring it to light anyways. And I was going to ask, Eileen, it's hard being a special needs parent. How on earth did you do that and find time to do a podcast and do what you do in the industry? And I'm almost getting this, just the idea and the shift in thinking feels like a weight is off. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to guess that you didn't just put all your focus on your kid, and you put focus on you, and that's empowered you to move forward. But I'm going to let you answer. That's my suspicion. How did you manage being a parent and also being this professional author, clinician and author and podcast? Yeah, because listen, I look at this world and it can be all consuming if you let it. So for our parents, how did you do more?
Yeah. You know, it is possible because I do have the village so many parents need. I have extended family around who adore my daughter and are incredibly empathetic and understanding and curious about her. And I have a partner who he edits my podcast. We work a lot in this work together. And we've set that up so that we can both be as available as possible, but so that we can do this work that matters so much to us. So I want to be really honest with that, because I work with a lot of parents who are not resourced externally in the ways that I am and that I describe. And it would be much, much more difficult to be able to be the parent that I want to be for her while also meeting parents where they are, right? Which is a lot of distress and a lot of angst and that sort of thing. So, but I also love the parents I work with. I'm biased, but they are the most wonderful people. They are incredible parents working so hard. And so it energizes me to work with them and to work on behalf of them. I love what I do.
Wow. And I love feeling the passion that you have in your work.
Thank you.
You know, I can see that you have so much good nature. We love that you're here. As we wrap up, I know we can talk for hours, but as we wrap up with what would you, kind of like a last minute advice, or what advice would you give our audience that you haven't already covered right now that you think it's very important for them to know?
Yeah. I think that, it sounds simple on the surface, but I know the parents listening will understand the complexities involved in it, is well, what I mentioned in the beginning, find your people and choose your people wisely. And what I mean by that is I think there are lots of opportunities to get support, especially all the virtual options that we have, but knowing that there are a lot of communities of parents of neurodivergent kids or kids with challenging behaviors, however they categorize and describe themselves, that are going to increase your burnout and not decrease it. So if there's a lot of talk about like, oh, this is so hard, my child is so difficult, hopelessness, helplessness, and there is no discussion about what can we do to help you get to a better place? How can you build your resilience? What do you need from this community today? It will leave you in a worse place. Okay? So find your people, but be very choosy about it and know that it needs to be a community where, yes, you feel seen and heard. You can talk honestly and openly about what's happening in your life. You don't have to censor yourself. And also there is this other side of the equation, which is, and how can we help you? How can you build your resilience? How can we help you heal, right? What support do you need today? And it sounds like your community in this podcast has that magical mix. So they're on a good path with it already. But the reason why I say that is that when we talk about our own nervous system stability and what are the kind of big bangs for our buck in terms of stabilizing and healing our nervous system, connection with others is one of the big ones, right? So if you can find that, then you are well on your way to healing your own nervous system, which allows you then to show up for your child in the ways that we've been talking about today.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Eileen, so much for your time. I love how we started and we ended of find your people.
Yes.
Be around your people, right?
It's not planned.
And we're so glad that you're now one of our people.
Yes.
Honestly, this has been fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to be with both of you.
Well, and we also want to invite all of our audience to listen to your podcast, Brain First Parenting. Probably it looks like you can find that at any Apple, Spotify, anywhere you would get your podcast. So please listen to Eileen and her wonderful advice, techniques, resources. You can also look at your website, eileendevine.com. Has a lot of tips and tricks and tools for our wonderful audience.
Thank you.
Thank you for being able to provide those resources out to our families.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for making us part of your day. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Polaris Connection so you never miss a conversation that inspires connection. We also want to thank our producer, Jesse Palmer, and our marketing director, Dallin Davis. Until next time, let's go do some good.